I'm perfectly comfortable with saying that historiography draws conclusions to the inference of the best explanation. And ideally, what you're looking for is cross-reference sources, ideally independent sources that...
What's going on, guys? Welcome back. So in this one, we're going to tackle a very hot topic when it comes to the Bible, especially to those that haven't read the Bible before. It's pretty much, are the stories in the Bible accurate? Are they real? Are they true? Did they actually happen? Or are they just metaphors that we tend to use or correlate with, things that we're going through on a day-to-day basis? How much can we rely on these stories? So I found this clip from Julian Dory's podcast regarding the interview with Wesley, and I found it very interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look. I haven't seen it yet. So again, all the reactions that I try to do are literally live. So let's go ahead and put that up on the screen, and let's see what kind of answers we get.
But there's also a lot of stuff that it's like, we were talking about one off camera, like, all right, did Jonah really get swallowed by a whale and live in there for 3 days? There's things that I've always looked at as like that's a lesson rather than a history. Furthermore, and I always bring this up when I'm talking with guys about anything ancient text. I think you have to. We're human beings, so we're fallible. We make mistakes. There's some sort of, there's a name for it, but like the basic experiment where they have like 20 people sit in a circle and they each whisper a story into each other's ear.
Yeah, the telephone game.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's the way to put it. So by the end, it changes by whatever small percentage it is. Maybe it's like 5 or 7% or something. So like you think about that in one setting in 1 minute in 1 day, and then you think about the fact that like the Bible is composed of all these stories that in many ways were passed down for, and many times like thousands of years, if not hundreds of years. And it's like, well, human bias can change it, story changing can change it. Do you ever struggle with, what's real and what's not, just on the base of like human fallibility with anything you read? And that doesn't just include the Bible. That also includes other things you read from anything in what we would call ancient history.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the UK, they call the telephone game Chinese Whispers, and as a good PC Canadian, somehow that doesn't seem appropriate. But yeah, I mean, so... just as to back up, I'm a trained historian, so that's what my education is in, and so I think, as a trained historian, I'm perfectly comfortable with saying that historiography draws conclusions to the inference of the best explanation, and ideally, what you're looking for is cross-reference sources, ideally independent sources that can have different angles or perspectives on a particular story, and that's not always possible. Now,
I will say that is a very good point, because if we take something, for example, like the Quran, where it was just written by or inspired by Muhammad, that's just one individual. So he can literally make up anything, put it into the book, and there's nowhere to fact check that. It's just one source. Whereas the Bible, there's so many different sources, and even though they're telling their stories in their own different way with different ways of telling it, it's all going back to the same place. So you have more, I guess, more credibility because there's a lot more people telling these stories that all come back and end the same way. So there's a lot of similarities between what they have to say, but it's a lot more people and a lot more testimonies to just one source. So that's a good takeaway for sure.
Now, with the New Testament, we have a lot of that, but when you're talking about something like the Old Testament, I would grant that there are different levels of probability to certain stories. Now, I don't think that means that they're not true, but I think if I put my historian hat on, I would say that something like Jonah being swallowed by the fish has a less probabilistic conclusion in terms of its truth than something like, and I would put the resurrection in a high category, simply because you have multiple independent lines of witness testimony that are indicating that Jesus lived, he was alive, he died, and then people saw him not dead. And so you have multiple lines of streams of evidence and individuals from different places at different times who are corroborating that fact. Now, you don't have that with something like Moses coming down from Mount Sinai.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not true. It just means, as a historian, I put things on a different level of probability. So
Yeah.
I would grant, and I would even say that some of the miracles of Jesus, when Jesus turns water into wine at Cana, at the beginning of John's Gospel, that has a lower probability of truth in the grand scheme of things from a historical perspective than the resurrection, because it's only being referred to as coming from one source.
So and I remember this morning when we were going to Dunkin' Donuts, we were talking about this a little bit, but obviously people watching right now weren't with us at Dunkin' Donuts, but we were going through how I believe in the Quran they say Jesus wasn't crucified, right?
Yeah.
They say someone else like stood in for him, maybe it was Judas or something like that. But the evidence does point to the fact that, because like we know Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure, that's all confirmed and everything. We know he did a lot of things and was a huge public figure. But like the evidence does point to the fact that he was actually crucified because of all the witnesses that were there up to and including like the Roman guards themselves not being able to mistake a guy who was so known like this. So therefore, if you also have, I'm extrapolating this, but if you also have evidence on the other end of that of people who, after witnessing him be killed on the cross, witnessed him alive, come out of the tomb, that's why you're saying something like the resurrection has like good empirical data, even though the actual event itself, technically defies the laws of physics and humanity and pretty much every fucking thing we do.
I will say this though, the Quran states, right, that the Bible is an authority figure when it comes to scripture, right? And if it says that, the fact that the Quran references the Bible and yet it contradicts what the Bible says, that alone should tell you the Quran, for the most part, made everything else aside from the Bible, it made it up. Because if it's calling and referring to the Bible as a priority book, a book of standard, and yet in that same reference, it diminishes what it says, then that right there is a contradiction to the Bible and to the Quran. So you gotta know where to draw the line. If you want to follow the Quran, that's great, good for you. By any means, I don't follow it. That's great for you, but you have to understand when it says that the Bible it's an elite text and it references to the Bible. You cannot go back and unreference it or contradict it, because at that point it just doesn't make any sense. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we call it a miracle for a reason, right? That people don't usually rise from the dead. If they did, then it wouldn't be a miracle. But in the sense of, it's a historical question in saying someone's alive, someone's empirically dead, but then they're being seen alive again. So what is the inference to the best explanation for that? And there are a number of conclusions based on secular materialism of, say, the mass hallucination theory or the mistaken theory. There are individuals in the past, historians, who have tried to come up with alternative explanations. I just find them, and not just me, I mean, the vast majority of New Testament scholarship has said, believing or not, that they're really not very strong in the grand scheme of things. And that's why, so when I was investigating Islam, one of the main problems that I had was this historical problem, where in chapter 4, verse 157 of the Quran, it says that Jesus was neither was he killed nor was he crucified, but it was made to appear to them. And then it says actually that those who believe it are not totally sure about this fact, which is...
Why does it say that?
Your guess is as good as mine. In fact, the problem with that particular surah, that particular chapter of the Quran, is that in the Islamic sources, you have a lot of commentary. So you have other Islamic literature. You have the Quran, which is the holy book. Then you have the hadith and the tafsir. And included in that group of literature are authoritative commentaries. But there is no authoritative commentary on this particular passage. And so there's a lot of different theories dependent on how you interpret that it was made to appear to them. So this is part of what we're talking about at Dunkin' Donuts. And for me, I mean, even if you go to the most skeptical iteration of historical biblical scholarship, if they can say basically, we can know very little, if anything, about Jesus, they'll say, we do know that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And we know that because not only do we have these 4 biographies that we call the Gospels, we have Paul and then Jude and James all testifying to it, and then you have other sources like the Jewish Romano historian Josephus.
How do you spell that?
Josephus, I believe. So Josephus was he was one of the key historiographers, particularly commenting on Flavius Josephus. So he lived in the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century. And he specifically recounts not just mentioning Jesus' name, but also Jesus' brother, James, and talks about the fact that James was stoned to death in Jerusalem. So there's a lot of historical credibility, not just on the historical Jesus, but that he was crucified, particularly crucified under Pontius Pilate. Other individuals, Tacitus, who's a key figure in how we get information about the Roman emperors. Tacitus, there were a few individuals. There was Tacitus, there was Plutarch, there was Cassius Dio, there was, these individuals who were Roman historiographers within this period of Greco-Roman antiquity, who were writing on people like the emperors. A lot of them mention
What years are we talking about with them writing, approximately?
So end of 1st century, beginning of 2nd century.
Okay, so like 100, 200 years after Jesus?
No, so within a 100-year period. So the 1st century is when Jesus lived. So Jesus...
he lived till 33 AD, right?
Yeah, 33 AD, and then you have these individuals commenting. But that's pretty common. I mean, when we're talking on ancient writing, we do have to be careful because we come from a hyper-literate culture. So almost everybody is literate, and we write a lot of stuff down.
Yes.
In the ancient world.
So what do you guys think? Do you guys think he makes a valid case? Because I do. The biggest takeaway that I have from this particular video is when it comes to the Bible, you want to treat it as a historical document because there were eyewitnesses. We have evidence of that. And those testimonies, that's what they claim to be. And they're coming from multiple different sources. So that's why there's more validity to the Bible than there are to the other types of books, like the Quran and those types of other religions. As always, put it down in the comments. Start up a conversation down there. That's what we're all about. It's just about commenting, liking, and having a debate down there. Let me know if you guys agree. Let me know if you guys disagree. It makes for better entertainment. So catch you guys in the next one.